We were incredibly antagonistic. We couldn't even stand to be in the same room. People had to separate us. For decades, Hollywood has celebrated Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the ultimate action heroes. Rocky, Rambo, the Terminator, Predator. Together, they defined an entire era of muscle-bound blockbusters, shaping the childhoods of millions. On screen, they looked unstoppable. But behind the cameras, the truth was far darker. What audiences never knew was that Stallone and Schwarzenegger weren't just rivals in theaters. They were enemies in real life. Their hatred ran so deep that Stallone later confessed, "We couldn't even be in the same room." It wasn't just friendly competition. It was personal. They mocked each other in public, fought for box office dominance, and even played dirty tricks to sabotage one another's careers. For years, fans only saw two superstars trading punches on screen. The real war was happening in Hollywood itself. And here's the twist. Stallone kept quiet about just how toxic things had been, until nearly 30 years later. Only then did he finally reveal the truth about his feud with Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is the untold story of the greatest rivalry in action movie history. Before they were bitter rivals, Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger were underdogs chasing the same impossible dream, Hollywood superstardom. For Stallone, the journey began in the streets of New York. He grew up poor, often bullied for his slurred speech and drooping face caused by a birth injury. By the mid-1970s, he was just another struggling actor, broke and nearly homeless. But then came a script called Rocky. Nobody believed in it. Studios wanted to buy the story and cast someone else in the lead. Stallone refused, insisting he play the role. Against all odds, Rocky became the sleeper hit of 1976, winning 3 Oscars and turning Stallone into a household name. He wasn't just an actor now. He was the face of the American underdog. But Stallone wasn't done. He followed Rocky with First Blood in 1982, introducing the world to John Rambo. Suddenly, he was no longer just the scrappy boxer from Philadelphia. He was the embodiment of raw American toughness. By the mid-1980s, Stallone was the highest-paid actor in Hollywood, carrying 2 of the most successful franchises of all time. At the same moment, a very different figure was rising. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Austrian immigrant with a thick accent and impossible physique, seemed like an unlikely movie star. He was dismissed by many casting directors. They said his accent was too heavy, his name too strange, his body too unrealistic. But Arnold had something else, relentless ambition. After conquering the bodybuilding world with 7 Mr. Olympia titles, he set his sights on film. Conan the Barbarian, 1982, gave him his first taste of success, but it was The Terminator, 1984, that changed everything. Directed by James Cameron, it transformed Arnold from a novelty into a global phenomenon. Where Stallone represented the relatable everyman who fought against the odds, Arnold represented something larger than life, an unstoppable force of nature. If Stallone was the underdog Americans rooted for, Arnold was the superhuman figure they feared and admired. By the mid-1980s, the box office was dominated by just 2 names, Stallone and Schwarzenegger. They weren't just actors, they were cultural icons. Posters of Rocky Balboa and the Terminator lined the walls of bedrooms around the world. Kids imitated Rambo's headband and Arnold's robotic one-liners. Together, they didn't just define action movies, they defined masculinity itself for an entire generation. But with 2 giants standing on top of Hollywood, there was no room for both to share the crown. What began as mutual respect quickly hardened into something else. Their images, their franchises, even their identities were now in direct competition. For Stallone, every hit from Arnold threatened his reign. For Arnold, every success from Stallone was proof he still hadn't fully conquered Hollywood. The stage was set. 2 legends had risen, but only one could be the ultimate action hero. Once both men stood atop the box office, the rivalry stopped being symbolic and turned personal. Stallone and Schwarzenegger weren't just competing for opening weekend bragging rights, they were fighting for the right to define what a Hollywood action god looked like. Stallone later put it bluntly, "We couldn't even stand to be in the same room. People had to separate us." The bad blood had a flashpoint that fans never saw, the 1977 Golden Globes. Rocky was the scrappy sensation, Arnold the swaggering newcomer who'd just won New Star of the Year for Stay Hungry. According to later accounts, the night devolved into petty taunts and ended with Stallone hurling a bowl of flowers in Arnold's direction. It was childish. It was human. And it was the beginning of a decade-plus feud that would spill into every press line and casting conversation that followed. Through the 1980s, their films became an arms race. Bigger bodies, bigger guns, bigger body counts. If Stallone turned Rambo into a one-man army, Arnold answered with Predator and Total Recall. If Arnold fired a handheld cannon in Terminator 2, Stallone chased the same shock and awe spectacle in Cobra and Rambo 3. Years later, Arnold would openly acknowledge how far it went. Each man tried to outdo the other on screen with sheer excess, physiques, weaponry, explosions. But the rivalry didn't stop at muscles and money. It got strategic, and sometimes dirty. When Arnold pivoted brilliantly into comedy with Twins and Kindergarten Cop, he proved he could be lethal and lovable. Stallone, determined not to be outflanked, followed into comedy and walked into a trap. Arnold has since admitted he pretended to want a certain script, letting word leak so that his rival would pounce first. The movie, Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot. Stallone took it. The film bombed critically and became a punchline Stallone still regrets. Decades later, Arnold confirmed the prank on air. Stallone has likewise called it one of his worst choices. In public, the two traded barbs like boxers trade jabs. Stallone jabbed at Arnold's accent and robotic acting. Arnold mocked Stallone's vanity and his fashion misfires. Trade papers and late-night couches became proxy battlefields. Even neutral observers described it as prolonged one-upmanship and subterfuge. Not the friendly rivalry studios love to sell, but a genuine Cold War between megastars who needed the same crown. What made the clash uniquely combustible was how personal identity fused with brand identity. Stallone's on-screen myth, blue-collar grit, the American underdog who bleeds but won't break, wasn't just a character. It was his origin story with Rocky. Arnold's myth, larger-than-life invincibility, the immigrant who conquers every arena, wasn't just a pose. It was a resume. Each new hit didn't merely open a sequel, it pushed the other man's persona off the cultural map. For audiences, it was thrilling. For the two men living it, it was suffocating. By the late 80s and early 90s, the feud had calcified into reflex. If one man circled a project, the other kicked the tires. If one scored a record-setting weekend, the other counter-programmed with louder spectacle or a new genre angle. Agents, producers, even gossip columnists learned to weaponize the tension. Float a rumor here, leak interest there, and watch the rivals take the bait. It made headlines. It made money. And it made both men miserable. Only years later did they start telling the truth out loud. That the rivalry wasn't just marketing noise. It invaded their choices, warped their instincts, and sometimes steered them into the wrong films for the wrong reasons. In private, they were keeping score. In public, they were pretending it was all in good fun. The reality, as both eventually revealed, is that the clash was real, and it left dents on two of the shiniest careers in movie history. By the early 1990s, the muscle wars between Stallone and Schwarzenegger began to lose steam, not because they forgave each other, but because Hollywood itself was changing. Audiences were no longer satisfied with heroes who relied only on brute force and endless explosions. A new generation of action stars emerged. Bruce Willis in Die Hard, Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon. Characters who were vulnerable, sarcastic, and more human. Stallone started to stumble. After the massive success of Rocky IV and Rambo 3, his follow-ups struggled. Cobra, Tango, and Cash, and especially Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot, damaged his box office dominance. For the first time in a decade, he was no longer untouchable. Arnold, meanwhile, stayed ahead with back-to-back hits. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Total Recall, True Lies. But even he couldn't escape the shift forever. By the late 1990s, audiences were tiring of over-the-top action spectacles. Both men saw their numbers decline as Hollywood moved toward new franchises, new stars, and a different kind of hero. And yet, it was in this downturn that their feud began to soften. Both had been bruised by the industry. Both realized the rivalry had pushed them into bad choices. Slowly, they began to find common ground. Along with Bruce Willis, they co-founded Planet Hollywood, a flashy restaurant chain that symbolized their new alliance. That renewed partnership soon leapt onto the big screen. In 2010, Stallone orchestrated the ultimate reunion in The Expendables. For the first time, the two legends appeared together in a movie, sharing a single scene that played like a knowing wink to decades of rivalry. The audience erupted because the history was real. 2 years later in The Expendables 2, Schwarzenegger returned with a larger role, finally fighting alongside Stallone instead of against him. By 2013, they went even further, co-starring in Escape Plan, their first true team-up as equals, carrying an entire film side by side. What once had been unthinkable in the 1980s was now reality. Stallone and Schwarzenegger, not enemies, but partners. The fallout of their feud didn't end with bitterness. Instead, it evolved into something unexpected, a brotherhood forged out of rivalry and a recognition that together they had defined an era no one could ever replace. After years of refusing to share the same stage, Stallone and Schwarzenegger eventually buried their old grudge and became close friends. Looking back, even Arnold admitted, "I'm so glad that Sylvester Stallone and I were able to clear up all that piled-up tension. Honestly, that kind of rivalry made both of us look bad. We were constantly attacking each other in the press, even pushing things to the ridiculous point where our competition became about who had the better body." Today, at nearly 80, both men remain surprisingly active. Schwarzenegger recently released his own documentary and headlined the action comedy series Feud. Stallone is leading the crime drama Tulsa King, appearing in the reality show The Family Stallone, and preparing to return once again in The Expendables 4. The truth is, they now speak about their rivalry with humor and perspective, old war stories told without bitterness. In a 2022 interview, Stallone reflected with a laugh, "Now we just laugh when we think about those days. We're like two last surviving dinosaurs, two carnivores when there's not much meat left out there. So we just enjoy each other." What was once Hollywood's fiercest feud has become its most unlikely friendship. Two legends who fought for the same crown, and in the end, share the same throne.